Get real, said Myron. Why would he be hiding in the closet? Maybe Mr. Gorf was married to Mrs. Gorf, said Allison. Said Myron. Who would ever marry Mrs. Gorf? Well, somebody had to, said Allison. Otherwise she wouldn't have been a Mrs. Maybe he loved her terribly, and then one day she just never came home, and he never knew what happened to her. All he knew was that she worked at this school, and she taught our class, and so he came here and he's hiding in the closet to find out if we're the ones who got rid of her. If I was Mr. Gorf, said Jason, I'd be thanking us. I wouldn't have ever wanted her to come home. Well, good job, said Jenny. If he was hiding in the closet, you just told him that we're the ones who got rid of Mrs. Gorf. Well, good job, said Jason. If I wasn't the one who told him, you sure just did. Guys, it doesn't matter, said Myron, because nobody is hiding in the closet. And he jumped up and he walked to the back of the room and he flung open the closet door. And out stepped a tall man with brown hair. Oh, thank goodness, he said. I accidentally locked myself in there this morning and I've been waiting all day for someone to come and let me out. Thank you. Now, surprisingly, the students weren't at all afraid of this man in the closet. He was very handsome and he carried this beautiful brown briefcase and he had this warm, soft, inviting voice. It was almost like you were sitting in this big, cozy leather chair in a library when you listened to him. He was so wonderful to hear. And all the kids just thought he was handsome and smart and sweet, and they weren't afraid of him. In fact, none of them even noticed the third hole in his nose. My name is Mr. Gorf, he said, and I'll be your teacher for the next few months. Now, I thought I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in the Himalayan mountains in a little town called Kathmandu. Have you ever been married? Asked Allison. No, I'm a bachelor, he said. The whole class breathed a sigh of relief. Now, why don't you all tell me a little bit about yourselves? I'm Mac, said Mac without waiting to be called on. I built the biggest snowman you ever saw last year. It was huge. We had to use a ladder to put the hat on top of his head. It was one of those big Abraham Lincoln hats, those like stovepipe hats. I don't know why they call them stovepipe hats. We don't have a stovepipe. We have a microwave. Hey, have you ever put a bag of marshmallows in the microwave? It's super cool. And all of a sudden, Mac stopped talking. Mr. Gorf's nose had flared. The right nostril flared to the right, and the left one flared to the left, and that hole in the middle seemed to get just a little bit bigger. And all of a sudden, Mac started coughing, and he tried to speak, but no sound came out. Well, that's lovely, said Mr. Gorf. Anybody else? Dee Dee raised her hand. My name's Dee Dee. I like Ninja Turtles and pizza, and my favorite... And Dee Dee didn't say anything else. Mr. Gorf's nose had flared. The right one flared out, the left side flared out, and the hole in the middle just got a little bit bigger, and suddenly Dee Dee had nothing else to say. Would anybody else like to say anything? Asked Mr. Gorf. Marcia raised her hand. My name's Marcia, she said. I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. Marcia had a beautiful voice like a pineapple milkshake, and Mr. Gorf flared his nostrils and sucked that one up right through his nose. Hey, what's going... asked Todd, but Todd was silent. Look at his nose, said Eric. It has... But Eric had nothing else to say after that. Nobody say any... Jenny tried to warn the class, but her voice also disappeared up Mr. Gorf's nose, and soon everybody in the class was silent. Mr. Gorf's middle nostril had snorted up all of their voices, except for Allison. She had remained silent, and she knew she'd only get 1 chance to speak, and she had to wait for just the right moment. What good little boys and girls you are, said Mr. Gorf. You're so nice and quiet. And then he laughed. Of course, this isn't my real voice. I stole this one from a nice, lovely gentleman I met in Scotland. He touched the tip of his nose. This is my real voice, he squawked. Now, if a donkey had a sore throat and he spoke with a French accent, that's kind of what Mr. Gorf's voice sounded like. But what he said next was even scarier than his real voice. Mrs. Gorf was my mommy! The children all froze, too terrified to move. But suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Gorf touched his nose. "Who is it?" he asked in that very pleasant voice from Scotland. "It's Mrs. Mush," she said. "I just came up to say welcome to Wayside School." "Well, that's very kind of you, Miss Mush," said Mr. Gorf, "but we're very busy right now. But perhaps later you can come by and we can get some tea and crumpets." "Oh, well, that sounds lovely," said Miss Mush. "Miss Mush! Miss Mush!" said Allison. "Help! Mr. Gorf is taking—" But Mr. Gorf's nose flared and Allison's voice got sucked up. "Did you say something, Allison?" asked Miss Mush through the door. Mr. Gorf touched his nose and then said in Allison's voice, "Yeah, Mr. Gorf is taking us on a field trip next week, but he might need some help. Do you think you could help us?" "Well, maybe," said Miss Mush. "Thank you, Allison." "See you later, Miss Mush," said the voice of Eric Evans. "Take care," said Calvin's voice. "Have a nice day," said Kathy's voice. And after Miss Mush left, Mr. Gorf made sure the door was locked. "I don't want to have any more interruptions," he said. Then he pulled out his briefcase and took out the class list, and it had all of the kids' names and their parents' names and their phone numbers and all of that. "Let's play a game," he said in his normal creepy French donkey voice. "The name of the game is Who Am I Now?" So he touched his nose, and a soft, pretty voice came out. And everybody looked around and saw it was Ronnie. So Mr. Gorf looked on his list until he found Ronnie's phone number, and he dialed the number. "Hello, Mommy," he said in Ronnie's voice. "Oh, no, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to call and say that I hate you, that you're a terrible mommy, that I wish you weren't my mommy." And then he hung up the phone. Ronnie started to cry. "Oh, how sad for you," he said in his terrible voice once again. "Now you can't even call her back and tell her that you're sorry or that you love her. Ha ha! Now, who am I now?" Mr. Gorf spoke again, but this time he had a bright, energetic voice, and everybody tried not to look at Joe because they knew it was his voice. But Mr. Gorf knew, and so he looked down the list until he found Joe's name, and he called his mommy. "Hi, Mommy, it's Joe. I just wanted to tell you that you're the worst mommy. You're so mean. I wish Daddy had married somebody else and never you. I have the worst mommy, and I can't believe I have to live with you for the rest of my life. I hate you." And he hung up the phone. Joe started crying because he didn't want those things said to his mommy. He loved his mommy. "Ha ha," said Mr. Gorf. "You guys took away my mommy. Now I'm going to take away yours." But just then, a knock sounded at the door. Mr. Gorf touched his nose. "Who is it?" he asked in his Scottish voice. "It's Miss Mush again," she said. "I just baked you a pie as a welcome home present." "Well, that's very nice, Miss Mush, but it's really best if you eat it warm. I can just leave it right here, or I can come inside and do it." "Perhaps I'll come out for just a moment," he thought. So he glared at the class, daring them to move even a muscle. And he walked over and he opened the door. "I hope you like pepper pie," said Miss Mush, and she shoved the pie right in his face. Well, Mr. Gorf backed up, and he had this thick, peppery cream all over his face, and the first thing he did was he began to sneeze. "Achoo! Achoo!" "Ha ha ha!" Todd laughed. "Hey, I have my voice back." Only Todd didn't sound like Todd. He sounded like BB. "Achoo! Todd, you sound like BB," said Calvin, but Calvin sounded like Leslie. "Achoo!" BB said something in French. "Achoo!" "Hey," said Marcia, but she sounded like the Scottish gentleman. "What's going on?" Mr. Gorf sneezed, and he sneezed, and he sneezed, and all the voices of all the children and everybody whose voice had been trapped up Mr. Gorf's nose started bouncing around the room like crazy, until finally Mr. Gorf let out a big "Achoo!" and his nose flew off and went across the room, and Mr. Gorf screamed like a donkey and clutched at his noseless face and ran out of the room. Now all the kids were panicking just a little bit because even though they had voices back, they weren't their own voices. They were talking crazy. Marcia was speaking Italian over in the corner. Calm down, said Miss Mush. "All of your voices are just trying to find where they belong. They're bouncing around the room. Give it a little while, and everybody's voice will return to the way it was supposed to." "How'd you know about Mrs. Gorf?" asked Calvin in a French accent. "Well, when I came up the first time, everybody was kind of talking, and I heard Kathy tell me to have a nice day, and so I thought, well, either Kathy decided to be nice, or your new teacher was stealing kids' voices and being mean to them. That seemed like the most logical solution because Kathy would never be nice. Well, maybe if you learned how to brush your teeth, said Kathy. So after a few minutes, all the voices settled down and everybody was able to get their voice back, and Joe and Ronnie were able to call their moms and tell them that they loved them and that they didn't mean what had been said and that it wasn't really them, and everything was happy. And then far, far away in Scotland, a man who hadn't spoken in over 20 years suddenly turned to his wife and said, "Top of the morning to you, Tilly."